I'm speaking with composer Tree Adams, whose vast array of projects have demonstrated his versatility and voice as a composer for film and television. Some of Tree's work includes Californication, Franklin Bash, Perception, Legends, and the recently the hit series The 100, which is currently in its third season on the CW. Tree, thank you so much for chatting today.
Thank you. Good to be here with you.
So to start off, I would love to know, kind of maybe rewinding back the clock, what was that initial spark for you that kind of made you want to focus your career path as a film and TV composer? Kind of what made you say, yep, this is what I want to do for a living?
Well, I think I had been a touring musician for a while. I'd been in a rock band for about 10 years, traveling, doing a lot of the same sound, essentially kind of band ensemble, guitars, bass, drums, kind of bluesy stuff. And I had been classically trained when I was a kid and played in orchestras and stuff, and I kind of was craving a little bit of a wider palette, and I thought it might be interesting to sort of not have to be the same guy every night and to kind of get to look into some of these other styles of music. That band, the Hatters, which we made a few records on Atlantic Records, in our last record that we were making, we had the opportunity to write a piece of music for a film. I remember the director, Brad Sibberling, was working on this movie, and he brought in, it was a VHS tape at the time for us to work to, and we did a little music to picture, and I thought, wow, that's fun. And it was sort of this barrel house like stride piano thing, and we had to arrange horns with the uptown horns, and it's kind of almost a Dixieland vibe. And I just thought, well, it's really fun to kind of inhabit this other musical style and to kind of work to picture and the magic of that dialogue. And I thought that was really cool. And then my band, was sort of, we'd kind of run out of road. I think we'd been touring for so long, and it was kind of, we had a cult following, but it didn't quite, transform into like rock stardom.
Right.
And, we kind of wound up, I think it was about 1996 in New York, sort of looking for the next chapter. And then I remember I met some people who were doing this composing thing, and they were using a computer to play samples, and were able to kind of by themselves, like in a room, do the sounds of a whole orchestra and all this. And they were doing a lot of commercial work, and I thought, wow, that could be kind of interesting. And then so I did take the plunge and bought a bunch of gear that I didn't know how to use, which was really frustrating. And that was also like, I think before the technology got as stable as it is now. I mean, it was like really the Wild West, I feel like, when you are talking about these computers with tiny little processors and no memory. And so that was an adventure in and of itself. And then I had a buddy who I'd gone to high school with who was making his first movie, my friend Sam Sokolow, and he asked me to write the music for it, and I thought, well, all right, I'll try it. Gave it a whirl. We did our best. And then I think it sort of presented itself to me as like, okay, well, this is probably the best way to, this is the new chapter, and this is probably the best way to actually get the opportunity to, play different styles of music, grow, learn.
Right.
And so I dove in, and then I think my wife Delphine, she and I were, just living together at the time, and I think we got married the following year, '97. And we were like, I think there's more work in Los Angeles. Let's go try our luck out there. So that was kind of the next step. And then, I don't know how many years we are later, but
well, I mean, it's working out. I think so.
It's worked out. It's definitely not an overnight thing. I mean, what are we talking? That's almost 20 years, right?
Right. Yeah. So were you? I mean, when you were in that space of bands and touring and kind of getting in and kind of discovering this world, were you aware of film music prior? I mean, you said you're classically trained, so did you kind of grow up latching onto any movies or scores that
Oh,
really spoke
definitely,
to you? That
definitely.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I had the Star Wars soundtrack when I was a kid, and I wore the needle out on that thing. Close Encounters.
Oh yeah.
I had all that going. And even, frankly, look, I mean, I'm not a big theater music guy, but, I mean, Annie, the Annie soundtrack, the Grease soundtrack, when we were kids, that was ubiquitous.
Right. Yeah.
And so that kind of stuck with me. I just think, I think in the 70s there was also music being made that was like slightly more cinematic. Like you had more like big string and horn arrangements on stuff. Like
Right.
I was a big Randy Newman fan. That was like one of the first. I remember buying Little Criminals when I was a kid, and all those arrangements. He's got horns and woodwinds and full blooming strings and everything in there. It's pretty deep, and so I think that was kind of fertile ground for it. And then in terms of getting hooked on actual scores, I got to say I was also big into TV scores. I loved like the theme songs
Oh yeah.
to all these things, and Magnum PI and Star Trek. I was a huge Trekkie. Loved that score. So it wasn't just the film music. And frankly, like Rocky, when that movie came out, I mean, not only was there, the huge fanfare for, the score, right?
Right.
Da-da-da, which is like one of those iconic,
Yeah.
memorable scores. But then I remember, like, when they made the sequel, didn't they have it was like Eye of the Tiger? They had songs that they were featuring as well. And then I think it really became a big thing to have like soundtracks with songs on them.
Right.
They
Right.
really kind of started in after that.
Yeah, and well, I mean, now you're in it. You're composing film and television, and your most current project is, of course, the 100, which is now 3 seasons in, and it seems like the type of show that, I mean, it must be heaven for a composer because it's such a rich and detailed world. And what was the goal for the music of the series? What was the intention that the series, I guess, needed musically?
Well, I just come to it this year. I'm new to it. This is the third season. I'm new to it. I think one of the things you find in this particular show is that, as with many of these kind of, sci-fi kind of genre pieces, it's a new world. They're creating their own world. So that affords you a huge opportunity as a composer because it's such a blank slate.
Right.
Now, that's on the one hand. On the other hand, because it's a genre piece and there's so many of these other things that have come before, and the sort of, shall we say, like the fandom is kind of tuned into, like there's a lexicon in place already.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's actually really wise to, pay homage to some of the other things that have come before and to basically add some new things to the lexicon, but know that you're working in a tradition. I say that, thinking, okay, we talked about Star Trek. Okay, that's, to me, a classic. Some of those themes,
right.
The way that they're kind of these sweeping themes, some of the kind of register moves that they do going up high with these vocals up there with the, soaring strings, and then, employing synths in such certain kinds of ways. That's one thing. Now you've got stuff like The Walking Dead or, Battlestar Galactica, that have given you kind of like other takes on it that people are aware of, employing lots of exotic, world instruments and stuff to kind of give a sense of otherness, far away. And I think one of the things at the root of a lot of these sci-fi things is that it's about the human experience.
Right.
Having been sort of transported out of out of where we are now. It's like, how do the humans fare in the future? How do the humans fare like on some space station? And so giving a human element to things is something kind of that'll give it soul, and it's the thing that is intriguing to people, because it's like we're imagining, okay, this is a future where there's an apocalypse and we're all screwed and we're all like, clawing at each other to survive.
Right,
How do the humans fare? And so there's, you can do a lot with the music to try and like, give it that warmth and that, that feeling of, I don't know, something that we can relate to, but in an alien context, So I think with the 100, I mean, that's I'm doing that all over the place.
So, I mean, when you're scoring a television show, are you approaching it kind of? I mean, I'm sure you have the series. I mean, you have that season kind of mapped out for you. Are you kind of tackling it one episode at a time, or do they give you kind of a overview of the entire season arc so you can kind of build the music to fit the whole season?
Yeah, there's no way I could do it one episode at a time for this particular one, because part of, I think, why they brought me in was to try and give more of a thematic component to the storytelling, and to try to help delineate between certain, worlds and clans that we have, and to help also underscore some of the different story arcs, obviously. So I've had to kind of keep reading the scripts and kind of figuring out how, some of these characters, like what kinds of themes we're going to need. Does everybody get a theme, or does that become Peter and the Wolf,
Right.
Or maybe rather than giving individuals a theme, maybe we give like a relationship a theme, like we have, and I can't really go too in depth because it's early in the season, I can't spoil it, but you have these sort of, there's a theme of mentorship, sort of like, Luke with the, with the dark side and Obi-Wan.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And it's like there's a little bit of that in play at some point. So rather than it being like that character's theme, it's kind of like this. It's the Force, It's the dark side and the Force, And then I think one thing that's really been useful is like creating a singular sort of heroic theme that can be reprised in different ways for all the different characters,
Right.
But the one that's really fun, honestly, is bad guys. I mean, like, bad guys come and go, and you can always, like, give them, something exciting and fun to play with. And there's just such an open territory there,
Right.
And that's the one that actually is the hardest, for me, it's the hardest on this show to do without seeing them, because the visual really informs a lot. You know what I mean? Sometimes they show up, like, and I'm, like I read it and I'm just like, okay, it's just a name, and I see, oh yeah, they're doing something horrible. Yeah, they're a bad guy. But when you see them, and they're adorned with like some crazy headdress, and and the way they're made up with the scars and the freaking, battle accoutrement, you're like, it really tells you what it's got to sound like.
Right. So I mean, you're pulling all that stuff from the visuals, and that's kind of informing, I guess, the sound of your music too.
Big time. And so to that effect, because I don't get, picture that far in advance, I asked the folks in the writer's room to send me some stills that they had taken when they were up on the set of some of the costumes and some of the sets. And that was really helpful to me.
So looking at just at the 100, but also any of your series, it could be like Legends or anything. But what aspect of a film or a TV show appeals to you, I guess, the most as a composer? I mean, kind of what's the first thing that kind of starts to inform your process or your music? Would it be the characters, the plot, the setting? I mean, what really kind of jumps out first and tells you kind of like, okay, this is the direction I need to go in?
Well, I think usually there's a character, like there's a main character or something I think it could be any of those things you just said.
Right.
But
Yeah.
And I think it's different per project, because some projects they rely on a different vehicle.
Right.
It could be, if it's about an ensemble cast, maybe it's kind of a little bit about that banter, and maybe it's just the setting. As I said, with the 100, there's a look and feel to this thing. You know what I mean? The characters, they themselves are pretty powerful, but it's sort of like, with Lord of the Rings or Star Wars or something, when you look at when you look at the world is telling you something. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Game of Thrones, same thing. You look at it, it's
right.
like, it's rich, and it just is begging for, big battle brass or, big taiko drums. So it really varies, I think, per project. But I would say across the board, looking back, like the stuff I've worked on, usually there's a character, and that character, like the lead character, they kind of have a thing that you got to follow. I mean, when I just did this one, Legends, Sean Bean, he has this kind of tough, stoic thing that's like, I don't know, it wanted this melody with a little flat six in it. And that interval, to me, it just like, it needed to be that for this guy. And that was the first thing that jumped out at me, and that became like this little motif that we have in the main theme, and then it became something that we did with orchestra, we did it with oud, we did it with every possible instrument, and it just somehow, it just felt like that's our guy. For Californication, I remember, seeing the first things we saw, it was like David Duchovny has this whimsicality about him, where he's just flipping the bird to everyone. And I don't know, there was something about whistling and slide guitar that had this portamento thing to it that just, it was the whimsicality. Something in that was all we needed to kind of capture his essence. And, and then we put all of the kind of attitude and the rock and roll in it. And then it just felt natural,
Right.
But yeah, that's usually, there's something like that. I remember I did this show Perception, where I got to do an orchestra for every episode. It was Eric McCormick played the lead role, and he was like a neurologist, not a neurologist. He was a neurologist with a schizophrenic,
Mm-hmm.
and he was basically, he was on the verge of madness the whole show. And I started playing around with different sounds, and I got some synth going with like different meters bouncing off against each other, and it would once in a while, like every 12 times around or something, it would like kind of line up. But it was sort of sneakers in a dryer, but it was also sort of sounded like electrons firing. And that became kind of the seed for his character. There was this kind of like high-pitched, almost bell-like neurons popping around, and that we just laid that underneath orchestral stuff, and anything we needed propulsively with like bass pulses and stuff, and it was just perfect. It just suited him, and it was done. So that's the kind of thing I think you look for.
Oh, that's extremely interesting. Yeah, it's just awesome how you find those things, just those nuances, and kind of turn them into these kind of textural, translate them texturally into the music kind of thing. That's really cool.
I think a lot of times, like, as a composer, you feel like you're like a jeweler. You have you have to, you have to figure out what that precious stone is that you're going to feature for your story or your character, and then it's a question of the setting. You just have to kind of figure out how you're going to set it, and you just keep kind of making that one piece. So.
Well, that's a good analogy. I never heard that one before. It was good. But to wrap up, I always like to ask this question to composers, and so it's kind of a general question, not related to anything. But if you could score any film ever made, pretending the original score never existed, which film would you choose?
Oh, that's awesome. Um, I'm gonna go with Chinatown.
Wow, that's an awesome choice.
Chinatown, and it was done well.
It was,
already
yeah.
done,
Oh, you
it was
can't
already
top
done really well.
can't top Jerry. Yeah, that's a. But that's a yeah. So I mean, that film noir, that kind of that's an awesome
I
thing.
love film noir. It's
Yeah.
just I love it because it's, as I said, it's like it's been done to death.
Right.
Um, it's sort of like the blues of filmmaking.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, we've only got, like in the blues, it's like we all know the chord progression already. You can vary it a little bit, but we basically know what you're going to do.
Right.
Okay, let's see what you got in this sort of framework.
Yeah.
I feel like film noir is a little bit that way, and it's like you know, we've all read the Philip Marlowe. We know what's going to happen here.
Mm-hmm.
It's tragic. It's rough and tumble. But what's your take on it? How are you going to shine through it? What's your voice in it? I kind of like it. It sort of levels the playing field.
That's an awesome answer. But Tree, thank you so much for your time today, and it was such a pleasure to speak with you, and it was incredibly insightful. So thank you so much.
Right on, Kai. Good talking, man.